Welcome to this fourth lecture on bug advocacy. In the last lecture, I focused on hard-to-reproduce bugs. There are many other reasons besides hard to reproduce for not fixing bugs. They're not always good reasons, but we have to deal with them anyway. So here's a list of objections, reasons or excuses for not fixing a bug. We worked non-reproducibility already. Let's look at the next two. Especially late in the schedule, programmers run out of patience with hard-to-understand bug reports. Bug reports can be hard to understand because the steps to reproduce the bug are unclear or incomplete, or because the failure itself is not obviously a failure. The report doesn't explain why the tester thinks it's a failure. So you look and say, well, what's the problem? Also, reports sometimes include so much irrelevant information that it's hard to figure out what to read. We'll get to these again in Lecture 6. The next pair of objections on the list, the programmer dismisses a bug as unimportant. The corner case argument is that the failure is unimportant because the test goes beyond reasonable limits. So even if the failure looks serious, it doesn't matter because it won't happen in the field. The other argument is the failure is unimportant because no one would care about it. Let's look at these in turn. I talked about corner cases, extreme condition testing in part 2. To recap, time is limited. We can't run every possible test. So we pick a few tests to represent a much broader group of possible tests we could have run. And the ones we should pick are the ones the program is most likely to fail. Those are usually the ones at the extreme conditions that stretch the program at its limits. If it fails on an extreme condition test, some groups make a tactical mistake. They just report the extreme condition test results. Then they have this long discussion about corner cases. The better method is to test further. See whether the program actually does fail under less extreme conditions. If it does, report the failure against those and skip the extreme condition discussion altogether. So much for corner cases. Another way of dismissing a bug as unimportant is to say that it has no customer impact. Programmers often say that a bug will have no customer impact, even though they really have no idea what they're talking about. I did a study once with David Pells, tech support manager. I was software development manager for a product, and we looked through years of customer data, call records, customer letters, posts to our online support forum, magazine reviews. We also did outbound tech support studies. Those are interesting. Instead of looking at the records of people who called you to complain, call up people who didn't complain. Many people have abandoned the product. They no longer use it, but they just never wasted their time calling. They got too fed up. What we discovered was that a lot of products that I didn't think bothered customers were actually pretty significant. The most important way that we measured this significance was this. Over the next year, through a series of maintenance releases, my staff fixed a huge percentage of these minor-looking bugs. As we did that, our average support cost for each new customer dropped, eventually to half of its former level. The other thing that happened was that our reputation got better. Our market share increased. We eventually became the best-selling product in our class. This is the only time that I've ever been able to do research that thorough. It took a lot of time. But my other experiences have been very consistent with this. They've led to two conclusions. First, people use products in more ways than I imagine. If I don't think anybody will do something, if I don't think anybody will be bothered by something, I might be right. That's not a safe bet. Second, customers and users are often bothered by minor but obvious bugs. These bugs cause people to lose trust in the product. If the company tolerates these, what other less obvious but more serious problems are there? Why should they trust their data, their work, to this product? When I worked as a prosecutor, I learned that something similar happens with graffiti. Obvious graffiti in a community causes people to lose trust in the effectiveness of local law enforcement. In turn, that lack of trust probably causes a rise in the crime rate. People interpret visible minor problems as signs of more serious ones. That interpretation creates new costs. So when someone says, yeah, it's a visible minor problem, but nobody would care about that, maybe they're right, but I want to hear more justification than my opinion is no one would care about it. Now, there are lots of potential sources of information for checking whether a bug might actually have no customer impact. Rather than taking the word of somebody who probably has no connection to the customers, check with people who might know. I would rather have the head of the documentation group say that a set of features are untrainably complex. The tech support manager tell me that a feature is unsupportable. In general, anytime you want the triage team to carefully consider a bug, bring to the meeting the stakeholder who is most affected by that bug and have that stakeholder explain its severity. They're the credible sources, and they can make the case. Here's what it's going to cost me. Continuing down the list, the next reason often given for not fixing a bug is that it's not a bug. Sometimes what you report really isn't a bug. Sometimes you just misunderstood the product. But in many cases, there's a genuine difference of opinion. Remember, quality is subjective. Quality is value to some stakeholder. A bug is something that threatens the value of a product for a stakeholder. Different stakeholders have different priorities, different needs, different preferences. So a bug for one person might genuinely be a feature for another. If you leave matters strictly at the superficial level, where one person says, I like it, someone else says, I hate it, you'll get a lot of entertaining screaming, but not much rational analysis. Tying this back to technical evaluation, which is what you're going to want to do at this point, means tying it back to the concept of an oracle. So let's review our work on oracles. An oracle is a heuristic. It provides a way of describing your expectations of a product. These can ground the discussion of the product and its failings in a way that promotes rational evaluation instead of annoying repetition of fuzzy opinions. Conforming to an oracle doesn't mean the program is working perfectly. It means that under this particular oracle's way of looking at things, there's nothing obviously wrong with the program. Similarly, the fact that the program doesn't live up to oracle-based expectations doesn't necessarily mean that the program is broken. For example, if we treat a specification as an oracle, conforming precisely to that specification is the right thing to do if and only if the spec is always correct and is absolutely complete. And of course, in practice, this is almost never true. Here's a list of oracle heuristics that we studied in the oracle section of the class. So let's sum up. When someone says, that's not a bug, it's a feature, my most effective response is not a personal attack. It's not an effort to lay a guilt trip on somebody. It's not going to their manager and saying, this person has no standards, they're a jerk, even though that might be true. It's also not the assertion of power that says, I get to decide what's right and wrong. I get to withhold signature on this problem. That's a bug, you have to fix it. To heck with your opinion. That's not very effective either. The most effective response to that's not a bug, it's a feature, is the calm, rational response that says, here's the heuristic that I'm using. Here's how this behavior clashes with my heuristic. Is my oracle wrong in general, or is it just wrong in this particular case? Can you explain why? That's a non-threatening question, or at least you can phrase it in a non-threatening way, and it can lead to a lot of really useful discussion, produce a lot of insights for both sides, and lead to a much friendlier resolution. The next objection is that you shouldn't be reporting this kind of bug. We don't want to read them. I've seen project managers, programmers, and sometimes even test managers criticize a tester for reporting bugs that they said no one would care about, no one would fix, no one even wants in the database. I had some fun with this in 1999, watching Al Jorgensen's award-winning presentation, Why Software Fails, at Star East. Al was up on the podium crashing Microsoft applications over and over, using buffer overflow attacks and other extreme value attacks, later documented in James Whitaker's book, How to Break Software. I was watching with a friend who'd been a test manager at Microsoft, and he leaned over to me and he said, these are all P4 bugs. If this guy was at Microsoft and he insisted on focusing on things like this, he'd see it on his performance review. P4 means low priority. Al's job would have been at risk for wasting his time on reports like this. These bugs, buffer overflow problems, went from being bottom priority, no one would care about this, to absolute top priority security problems. But that's not always true. And if somebody tells you that your work is inappropriate, you need to think very carefully about that feedback. Let me give you a different kind of example. Think about contract-based development. Someone else pays your company to build a product for them. Sometimes the client knows what they want, and so they specify it in the contract. The client's design may or may not be any good. But who pays for the work of the tester who decides to write bugs against the design? And what's this work worth if the client's not going to even consider suggestions to change the design? No, I like it like that. That's why I put it in the contract. This project's manager has every responsibility to say to this tester, your work is out of the contract's scope. Stop it. Here's another example. Late in the project, minor bugs that won't be fixed can burn a lot of time. How much time? Well, I want you to think about the bug reporting workflow that we looked at for a deferred bug. Think about all the people who spend time with that bug after it's gotten into the database. Ignore the reporting time. At a few companies, I've been involved in trying to build estimates of this time. How many total person hours across all the decision makers it's going to take to defer a bug? 6 to 8 hours for commercial software is probably a reasonable estimate. For regulated software, that number is probably higher. Late in the project, everybody's working overtime already. You can grind a project to a halt with minor deferrable bugs. Instead of fixing bugs, the team drowns in processing bugs that won't be fixed. A project manager who sees that trend will often, aggressively, entirely appropriately try to stop these reports at their source. They're not doing anyone any good. One way to deal with late bugs is called mentioning them in passing. The tester reports the bug informally. Oh, by the way, we saw this. Is anybody interested? The idea is that this gets the bug noticed at least a little bit, but there's no overhead if the decision is not to fix it. A different approach that I prefer is to use an alternate database. Imagine we're close to finishing release 2 of the product. A few months later, we'll start release 3. Rather than reporting a minor bug against release 2, why not put these in the release 3 database right now? The triage team won't officially look at the release 3 database until later, but anybody who wants to look can look at any time. And so if the project manager and some of the programmers skim the database, they might pick out a few things that they say, oh, that might be trouble, let's just check. And by being in the release 3 database, when release 3 opens, these things are there early. They might actually get fixed. Our list's final excuse for not fixing a bug is the programmer and project manager think you are so incompetent or so obnoxious that anything you report should be ignored. This really happens. People really do evaluate your bug reports based on their opinion of you, not just their technical impression of your report. We'll talk about the human issues of credibility and influence in the next lecture. So let's sum up. Project managers have lots of reasons for not fixing bugs. Some of these lose their force if you write a better bug report. That doesn't mean you can get everything fixed. You can't. But you can provide the kind of information that will help the project team make better decisions about what to fix.